I don't remember the operation itself. A mercy, perhaps, or just the first stage of the procedure. Not the first cut of the scalpel, not the acrid ozone smell of burning flesh as the plasma cutter breached my skull. I don't remember them pulling out the thing that made me me. But I remember the last hour. The last hour I was still human. I remember it because I was thinking of the color blue. The medbay was tiled in what had once been white, but was now the color of old ivory, riddled with a web of cracks. The seams between the tiles were caked with something dark, like rust or dried blood. The air was sterile, dead. Filters hummed in unison with a distant, uterine rumble of machines that seemed to emanate from the very foundation of the manufactorum. It smelled of ozone, a weak antiseptic solution, and something else, something sweetish, like superheated oil. They stripped me and strapped me to a metal cot. Thick leather straps with copper rivets bit into my wrists and ankles. It was cold. A coldness radiated from the cot, seeping into my bones. And this cold wasn't just temperature. It was the cold of indifference. I was not alone. Across the tile, making scraping and hissing sounds, an attendant moved. An old woman, or at least what was left of one. Her spine had been replaced with a hydraulic piston, forcing her into a permanent hunch. Her arms, severed at the elbows, ended in complex mechanical manipulators, pistons. Wires snaked from her empty eye sockets, plugging into a port on the back of her neck. She was blind, but her movements were precise to the inch. She washed the floor endlessly, forward and back with a quiet rustle. Her skin, the color of old parchment, was stretched taut over the metal framework of ribs that protruded from beneath her robes. But her mantle... Emperor on the throne, her mantle was blue. It was not the deep blue of the ultramarines, not the electric discharge of a plasma blast, and not the deathly blue of veins on a corpse. It was a soft, faded, almost grey from time and washing blue. The colour of a summer sky over the long-lost agri-world where I was born. A colour that makes you think not of war and duty, but of home. Of a time when the galaxy seemed vast and full of wonders, not an endless conveyor belt of fear, labour, and death. I stared at that colour, and the cold of the metal receded. I remembered my sister, Ilara. It was the Emperor's Ascension Day, and the heat on Viridia Prime was unbearable. The dust wheat harvest was in, and we'd been released from the fields for the festival. Ilara wore her only dress. Not the rough burlap we wore every day, but real, thin cotton our father had traded from a free merchant for 3 sacks of prime grain. The dress was that exact colour. She spun in the dusty square, the fabric lifting, and she laughed, and for a moment it seemed she was a part of that endless, peaceful sky. That she might just lift off and dissolve into that blue. "Look, Callan!" she cried. "I'm flying!" I watched the mechanical old woman pushing the mop, her monotonous movements. Callan. That was my name. How strange, I thought. And the thought felt thick, like molasses. How strange that something so innocent, so past, can exist in a place like this. I clung to that faded fabric with my eyes. It was my anchor in a world that had already let me go, left me to drown. I stared at it until the tech adepts in their crimson robes blocked her from my view with their massive augmented bodies. There were 3 of them. They entered silently, like shadows, but their presence compressed the air. They smelled different. Machine oil and incense. They were enormous. Their bodies, hidden beneath ritual robes, were more machine than flesh. From beneath their hoods, it wasn't eyes that looked at me, but clusters of red optical lenses. Subject 77 Gamma, one of them rasped from a vox grill. The voice was devoid of intonation. Prepare for purity protocol. They did not speak to me. They spoke about me. I was not a patient. I was an object, raw material to be processed. One of them, a junior, began laying out instruments on a mobile cart. I watched as his 6-fingered metallic hand arranged bone saws, syringes with thick needles, drills, spools of wire, scalpels, and something that looked like a soldering iron, all with surgical precision. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. My fingers clenched on the cold cot. I was still Callan. I was alive. I was afraid. Begin preliminary erasure, the senior adept ordered. The junior picked up the largest syringe. He didn't swab my skin with alcohol. He didn't say, "This will sting a little." He simply approached and, with mechanical force, plunged the needle into my neck, straight into the carotid artery. Cold. A viscous, burning cold flooded my veins, reaching my heart, and from there, my brain. The world swam, but not like it does from alcohol or fatigue. It became sharp, frighteningly sharp. The adept with the syringe stepped back and picked up a data slate. Cognitive Association Test, Procedure Lethe Alpha. His voice no longer came from a grill. It sounded as if it were directly inside my head. State your place of birth. I opened my mouth. I knew the answer. It was so simple. Viridia Prime, green fields, 2 suns. I remembered the smell of dust wheat after the rain. I couldn't. My tongue muscles seized. The name, so simple, dissolved into meaningless sounds in my mouth. I remembered the feeling of home, but the fact of home was gone. The chemical he had injected wasn't a poison. It was a solvent. A solvent for facts. Failure, the adept stated flatly. State the name of your maternal donor. Mum. I panicked. Her face, warm hands, the smell of baked bread, she sang me lullabies. I remembered the tune. But her face, it was blurring. Did she have brown eyes? Or blue? What was her name? Ma. I forced out. Tears sprang from my eyes. Not from grief, from helplessness. Failure. Subject is exhibiting standard emotional resistance. Increased dosage. Procedure Lethe Beta. Another needle. In the temple this time. I flinched, but the straps held me in a dead grip. The new jolt of cold was stronger, and this time it didn't take the facts, it took the feelings. The panic vanished, the fear was gone. All that remained was a cold, detached observation. I am lying on a table. I am being erased. This is unpleasant, but nothing more. State the name of your sibling, the adept continued. Identifier, Ilara. They knew her name. Ilara, I said clearly. My own voice sounded alien. Describe associated traumatic memory. 7th year of life. Incident at the river. I searched my memory. Yes, the river. Ilara fell in. She was drowning. I dove after her. I pulled her out, blue, choking. I performed resuscitation, just as Father had taught me. I cried and screamed. I saved her. I opened my mouth to tell them, and found nothing. There was an emptiness. Not just forgotten. It had never happened. The memory wasn't locked away. It was excised. All that was left was a scar in my soul I could no longer identify. The adept nodded. Emotional bond with sibling severed. Basic purification complete. He put the slate away. I was disappearing. Callan was disappearing. I was almost no one. An empty vessel. And then, through the chemical fog of oblivion, I saw her, the old attendant. She had finished washing the floor by the door and was now moving toward my cot, making the same sounds. She passed the adepts, who ignored her as if she were furniture. She stopped beside me. Her empty, wire-filled sockets were level with my face. And I saw her mantle again. Faded blue. The adepts had erased Ilara's name. They had erased the incident at the river. They had erased the fact of my birth. But they didn't know about the dress. They didn't know about the color. That thought wasn't a fact, not an emotion. It was just an image, a pure, untainted image that the chemicals couldn't dissolve, because it was neither memory nor feeling. It was a symbol. The senior adept, meanwhile, placed a metal circlet on my head with clamps. He muttered something in binary cant, and the circlet tightened, digging painfully into my temples. Subject is ready for the main procedure, he said to the surgeon, the third adept, who had been standing silently by the instrument table. You may proceed. The surgeon was more machine than man. His right arm was a complex manipulator with a dozen interchangeable attachments. He selected one that ended in a high-frequency saw. A high, thin sound pierced the air. I closed my eyes. I was no longer Callan. I didn't remember my home, or my mother, or my sister. But I saw the color blue. Blue, like the sky. Blue, like the dress. I will remember. Blue. I will. Darkness. And the sound of metal meeting bone. Consciousness did not return. It was switched on. It wasn't a soft dawn, a gradual waking from sleep. It was an electric shock, as if a shattered, dead screen was suddenly overloaded with power. A second of blinding white noise, a deafening crackle of static in my head, and then a hard, dry click, and the world snapped into focus. The world was data, Internal systems reported their status one by one, flooding my new mind with information. Initialization complete. Power nominal. Augmetics stable. Hydraulics pressurized. The data stream poured into my brain, filling the void. Pain receptors offline. Vocalizer deactivated. Optics engaged. I was standing locked in some kind of niche like a stall for livestock. A dark room smelling of rust and old oil. In the upper right corner of my vision, dim amber symbols glowed. Ambient temp, 34 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 88%. Air quality, particulate, high. The chronometer read, cycle 889, day 312. I tried to blink. My eyelids didn't move. I no longer had eyelids. There was only the dry click of a diaphragm, mechanically clearing the lens. I tried to breathe. My bellows expanded from habit, but they weren't pumping air. They were circulating a viscous, cold fluid through internal tubes. The sound of my breathing had become a rhythmic, dull, hydraulic hiss, like a heavy, mechanical breath. A command flashed in my consciousness. Diagnose extremities. I obeyed. I raised my right arm. It was not an arm. It was a three-fingered metal claw, heavy as an anvil, connected to a massive forearm of pistons and bundled cables. The metal was filthy, rusted, coated in a layer of ancient grime. I watched the claw close with a sharp metallic sound and open with a protesting scrape. An internal check immediately reported, functionality 100%. I raised my left. The same sound, the same scrape. Functionality 100%. I tried to do something that wasn't in the command. I tried to move my little finger. There was no finger. I tried to make a fist. The claw did not know that motion. I tried to speak. The mechanism in my throat twitched, made a dry sound, and froze. A brief message flashed. Vocalizer deactivated. I was mute. New command. Verify support systems. I looked down. My legs had been replaced with heavy hydraulic supports, like the legs of a sentinel cargo walker. My torso was split open, ribs pried apart, and a hissing power unit was mounted in my chest cavity, glowing faintly with a sick green light. It vibrated, and that vibration resonated through my entire new body. I was a machine. There was no fear. The chemicals they had pumped into me on the table had erased it. There was no horror, no disgust. There was only awareness. A cold, dispassionate statement of fact. Callan had died on that table. This is what was left. On my rusty forearm, beneath the grime, a code was stenciled. White paint, Gamma 77. It was my new name, my designation. Diagnostics complete, systems nominal. With a hiss, the retaining clamps in the wall snapped open. Command: proceed to post 12-4. A new stream of data flooded my brain, overwriting everything else. A map, a schematic of the Manufactorum. A red, flashing line overlaid on my vision, indicating the path. I obeyed. I took the first step. My mechanical foot fell to the floor with a dull, heavy impact. The floor, made of perforated steel plates, shuddered. The weight was monstrous. I must have weighed half a ton. Each step was an impact that shook my surroundings, accompanied by the grinding of servos. I was not made to walk. I was made to stand. I walked out of the activation bay. I was surrounded by hell. I was on a gantry, circling a Manufactorum the size of a city. Below, 1,000 feet down in the crimson fog, pistons the size of hab blocks were working. Rivers of molten metal flowed in channels. The air trembled with the noise. It was a rhythmic, deafening, oppressive din of impacts and explosions that didn't enter my ears. My ears were waxed and sealed, but penetrated directly into my bones, into my metal frame. It was the music of the Manufactorum, the great litany of the Omnissiah. I walked along the narrow bridge. The red line in my optics led me on. From around a corner, out of a cloud of steam, a cargo servitor emerged. A massive, many-legged beetle, carrying a white-hot crucible on its back. It moved fast, ignoring me. An internal analysis immediately reported obstacle, collision probability 44%, and just as quickly, evasion protocol activated. I didn't want to move, but my body moved on its own. It pressed itself flat against the wall, letting the machine pass. My hydraulics acted faster than I could process the command. I was a passenger in this body. I walked on. I felt no heat from the lava below. My sensors simply reported ambient temp, 78 degrees Celsius, cooling systems active, level 120%. I was protected from the world. I was insulated from it. I passed a maintenance station. Another servitor, an exact copy of me, stood in a repair clam. Its chest cavity was open, and a tech adept in crimson robes was digging around in its mechanical insides, welding something. The servitor was active. Its optics glowed dimly. It was watching itself be repaired. It didn't flinch. It didn't object. The red line in my head led me to a massive armored door. Manufactory number 4, line 12. Bolter shell production. The door hissed open. It was quieter here. The deafening roar was replaced by a different sound. A rhythmic, rapid clanging and hissing from dozens of identical presses. My place was at the end of one of the lines. It was a narrow niche, a control pulpit built into the wall. I walked into it. Connecting to station. I had no time to do anything. Heavy retaining clamps shot from the wall, slamming with a deafening sound into the grooves on my shoulders and hips, bolting me to the spot. A thick cable rose from the floor and, with a sharp sound,
slammed into the power socket on my chest. Another, thinner, plunged
into the back of my neck, into the main data port. I jolted, not from pain, from intrusion. A cold stream of pure information flooded directly into my brain, washing away everything else. Protocol activated. Task quality control. I was part of the machine. My claws rested on the control pulpit. They fit perfectly into the recesses. The conveyor jerked and began to move. The first shell appeared before me, a gleaming, dull bronze casing. Motion 1. Left claw takes the casing. My finger sensors immediately reported. Weight, 1.102 kilograms, nominal. Motion 2. Right claw places it in the calibrator. A green light glows. Motion 3. Left claw pushes the casing into the right-hand chute, to the packing line. A new shell. Motion 1. Take. Weight, 1.098 kilograms, nominal. Motion 2. Place. A red light glows. Analysis. Microfracture in casing, 0.04 millimeters. Motion 4. Right claw pushes the casing into the left-hand chute, and it clattered away into the reject bin. Motion 5. My metal finger taps a rune on the console. Log. 1 unit, reject. Code 774. Motion 1. Motion 2. Motion 3. Time passed. How much? The chronometer was unnecessary. There were only cycles. Cycle 104. Cycle 105. My movements were perfect. Precise, without fatigue, without thought, without doubt. It was simple. I was a function. I was perfect. My hydraulic joints worked smoothly, lubricated and efficient. Cycle 2000. Suddenly, a yellow warning flashed in my optics. Scheduled line halt. Maintenance. The conveyor froze. My arm, just reaching for the next shell, stopped in midair. I couldn't lower it. I couldn't move. Protocol standby locked all my motor functions. I stood. 10 seconds. 30. A minute. I stared at the frozen shell. I was no more alive than the machine I was chained to. Maintenance complete. Resuming operation. In that same split second, my arm completed its motion. Cycle 2001. Cycle 4408. Cycle 4409. I took. I placed. I pushed. The world had narrowed to these 3 motions. The clanging of the factory became background noise. The data in the corner of my optics ceased to mean anything. Cycle 4410. Motion 1. Take. Motion 2.
place. And then, a flash, it filled my entire field of vision. Not red, not green, not amber. It was blue. Inside my consciousness, something fractured. Error. Data corrupted. It wasn't a color. It was a file. A file that shouldn't exist. It wasn't linked to anything. Not to a sister. Not to a dress. Not to a sky. It was just pure, faded, impossible blue. A virus. A ghost in the code. Attempting deletion. Access denied. The file was locked. A word surfaced that shouldn't exist. Clearance. Callan. And immediately, error. Identifier Callan not found. The flash vanished, but it left an afterimage, like a burn on a retina I no longer possessed. Motion 3. The green light was on. My left claw twitched. Not smoothly, but spasmed, making a sharp metallic sound. The shell, instead of sliding into the right chute, slipped and struck the divider. Motion 4. My right claw, following the broken cycle, jerked and, instead of waiting, struck the jammed shell. It didn't go into the reject bin. It fell to the floor. A deafening sound of metal on metal tore through the monotonous rhythm of the factory. Inside, everything screamed. Protocol violation. Cycle 4411. Critical motor system error. I froze. My programs were screaming at me, howling. They demanded I hit the red alert button. They demanded I initiate a purge protocol. They demanded. I did not move. I stared at the shell that had fallen to the filthy, oil-slicked floor. It gleamed in the dim light. I had made a mistake. The machine had made a mistake. I tore my gaze from the shell. And for the first time since my activation, I looked not at my work, but forward. I looked at the others. Across from me, on an identical line, stood another servitor, Delta 12, an old, worn-out model. His entire left arm was covered in fresh weld seams. He had frozen too. His head was turned. His red optic was not looking at the conveyor. It was looking straight at me. And in that optic, there was no program, there was no panic. There was nothing but a cold, heavy awareness. He had seen. He knew. He knew. My programs were still screaming, but over that howl, a quiet, alien, impossible sound echoed in my consciousness. Callan. Error. Ghost code detected. Initiating forced self-diagnostic. Lockdown. I wasn't just a machine. I was a broken machine. And judging by the gaze opposite me, I was not alone. We stared at each other for an eternity, or, by my internal chronometer, 2.18 seconds. Delta 12 across from me. Me, Gamma 77. Between us, the clang of the still-running conveyor, and my fallen shell on the floor. My programs were screaming. Protocol violation, critical error, alert, red runes flashed at the periphery of my vision, demanding immediate action. Press the button, report, acknowledge the failure. Delta 12's gaze was unreadable. His red optic didn't blink, but I felt. No, wrong word. I computed a signal from him. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. He saw in me the same thing that was in him. Error. Ghost code. Lockdown. My systems couldn't take it. The contradiction between the program, sound the alarm, and the new unknown impulse, do not move, caused an emergency shutdown. My world went black. For a split second. And then it switched on again with a painful jolt, as if my new head had been struck with a hammer. Forced reboot, restoring protocol. I lowered my gaze. The red warnings were gone. My programming was restored. Task: remove obstruction. My right claw slowly lowered. A hose with a gripper hissed from a port on my waist. I couldn't reach the floor. A mechanism I didn't even know I possessed activated itself. A magnetic clamp shot out, attached to the fallen shell, and retracted it. Task: dispose of damaged object. I dropped the shell into the left chute into the reject bin. I pressed the rune on the console. Log: 1 unit loss, code 009. Operator failure. I was punished. Not by a tech adept, by myself. My own system fined me for the error. I raised my gaze. Delta 12 was no longer looking at me. He was working. He took, he placed, he pushed. His movements were perfect. Too perfect. He didn't even twitch. He was avoiding looking in my direction. He was hiding, just as I would have to hide now. The conveyor resumed its monotonous rhythm. Cycle 4412, cycle 4413. I returned to my work. My claws moved with their former, flawless precision. But everything had changed. Before, I was a program. Now, I was a program that knows it's a program. I was a machine that lies to itself. My internal diagnostic systems were still running, trying to find the cause of the failure, scanning memory, searching for corrupted sectors, and they found it. That same file. Blue. I felt the purge protocols take aim at it. I felt a mental pressure, a desire to erase, to forget, to return to the perfect, thoughtless work. I did something I shouldn't have been able to do. I resisted. I didn't know how. I just concentrated. I grabbed that file, that scrap of blue, and I hid it. I wrapped it in other, safe protocols. I lied to my own systems. Diagnostics complete. Error. Brief power surge. Systems. Nominal. I am a liar. I am a virus. And I began to watch. Before, the world beyond my workstation didn't exist. Now, it was the only thing that mattered. The line was working. To my right, Gamma 76 performed the same task. His movements were fluid. In his optics, there was emptiness, a true void. He was what I was supposed to be. He was perfect. To my left, Gamma 78 was the same. I watched Delta 12 across from me. He never raised his head again. He was afraid. I understood this, not with emotion, but with calculation. His movements had become 0.02% faster than the norm. He was rushing. He was afraid of being caught for seeing me. I was not alone, and it was not a salvation. It was a curse. We were contagious. Cycles passed, thousands of them. I learned to live a double life. My hands worked with flawless precision. Take, place, push. But my mind, my new, broken mind, watched. I began to notice them. The errors, not like mine, others. Epsilon 4, a loader servitor, massive as a tank, hauled crates of finished shells. His protocol was simple. Take crate, carry to platform, place, return. Yesterday, during cycle 9014, he took a crate. He carried it to the platform, and he did not put it down. He just froze, stood there with the crate in his raised arms. 2 seconds. 5. 10. The conveyor behind him stopped. Other loader servitors froze, waiting. Epsilon 4 stood. His optics were aimed at the wall. Just a blank, rusted wall. No alarm sounded. Everything was quiet. And then I saw him. From the shadows, from around the corner of a repair station, a tech adept emerged. Not one of the ones in robes. This one was different. He was almost naked metal, long arachnid limbs. In his hands, he carried not tools. He carried a staff, a long metal pole with a crackling tip. He did not run. He walked toward Epsilon 4, slowly, almost lazily. He approached the frozen servitor from behind. He said nothing. He did not check him. He just raised the staff and, with force, plunged the crackling tip into Epsilon 4's back, directly into his power unit. There was a deafening, dry electrical discharge that made my senses blind for a moment. Epsilon 4 twitched. It wasn't the movement of a machine. It was a shudder. He dropped the crate. Shells scattered across the floor. The servitor crumpled to its knees. Thick black smoke poured from its back. The tech adept pulled out the staff. He kicked the servitor with his foot. It toppled onto its side. Operator failure. Replacement required. The tech adept turned and walked silently back into the shadows. I watched it. My hands did not falter.
Cycle 9015. Take place. Push. I understood. A failure is not a malfunction. It's not a breakdown to be repaired. A failure is heresy, and it is punishable by death. I looked at Delta 12 again. He had seen it too. His head was turned just enough to see Epsilon 4 fall. He looked at me. For just a fraction of a second, in his optic, there was no longer recognition. In it, there was terror. I was on that table again. The chemicals were in my veins again. But this time, it wasn't a chemical. It was fear. I was broken. I was a heretic, and they knew. Or they would. Cycle 9016. Take place. Push. I had to be perfect. A perfect liar. But that blue file, it still burned in my memory. And now it didn't seem like a virus. It seemed like the only thing that was real. Fear became my new operating system. After the execution of Epsilon 4, the air in the factory changed. It became dense, electrified. I continued to work, cycle, cycle, cycle. My hands moved with flawless, measured grace. I had become the best liar in this hell. But my mind, my Gamma 77, no longer belonged to the machine. It was scanning. It was hunting for the threat. And it found it. That tech adept with the electrostaff. The spider, as I had mentally named him, had not left. He had stayed. I saw his shadow in the far corners of the factory. He didn't use the main walkways. He moved on the upper gantries, through dark maintenance tunnels behind pillars. He wasn't repairing. He wasn't maintaining. He was watching. I felt his gaze on me. Several times my optics, scanning the environment, caught his silhouette. He would stand motionless like a statue of rust, and his red optics would be aimed directly at our line, at me, at Delta 12. He knew. He couldn't know what, but he sensed the flaw. He was the hunter, and we were the wounded prey pretending too hard to be healthy. Delta 12 felt it too. His movements became brittle, too precise.
He was afraid of the slightest mistake. He was afraid to look in my direction. He had turned himself into the perfect slave, hoping not to be noticed. But I knew we had already been noticed. The execution of Epsilon 4 wasn't just a punishment, it was a warning. Cycles passed, tens of thousands. I worked, I lied, and I waited. I didn't know for what. And then, during cycle 74,301, it happened. The spider descended. He emerged from the corner of the repair station, the same place I had seen him first. He walked slowly, not hiding. His metallic arachnid legs stepped silently on the oil-slicked floor. The factory continued its work. The rhythm of the machines became the backdrop for his approach. He walked along our line. He stopped at Gamma 78, the one to my left. Gamma 78 was clean, empty, perfect. The spider stood and watched him. A second, two. Gamma 78 continued to work, oblivious. The tech adept tilted his metal head. He scanned something. Then, satisfied, he took a step toward me. He stopped directly behind my back. I couldn't see him. My head was locked in place, but I felt him. My audio sensors picked up the quiet hiss of his power pack. My temperature gauges registered the heat radiating from his electrostaff. He stood there and watched me work. Cycle 74,302. Motion 1, take. Motion 2, place. Motion 3, push. My hands did not tremble. I was perfect. He stood for a full minute. Cycle 74,303. Take, place, push. Cycle 74,304. Take, place, reject. He did not leave. He was waiting. He knew I was broken. He was just waiting for the crack to show. And in that moment, in that icy loop of fear, something inside me broke. Not the program, not the mechanism. The fear broke. I understood that he wouldn't leave. He would stand there for an hour, a shift, a day, until I made a mistake. And if I didn't make a mistake, he would take me anyway. Because his instinct, the instinct of a machine for another, wrong machine, would not deceive him. I was a dead man. Epsilon 4 was a dead man. Delta 12, he was a dead man too. He just didn't know it yet. I looked at Delta 12. He couldn't see the spider behind me, but he could see that the space across from me was empty. He should have been able to see me, and now a figure was blocking the view. He knew who was standing there. Delta 12 slowed. His claw froze over a shell. Error, my internal vox whispered. Fear, I understood. The spider behind me stirred. He had noticed Delta 12's hesitation. I heard his staff activate, a quiet, high-pitched sound. He was going to kill Delta 12, right now, for being afraid. And then he would kill me. And in that instant, in that split second, while the spider turned his head toward Delta 12, two programs collided inside me. The Gamma 77 program, which screamed, "Work, don't move, be perfect." And that file, blue. It was no longer a memory. It had become an action. It had become rage. Cycle 74,305. Motion 1. Take. Motion 2. I did
Not place the shell in the calibrator. I crushed it. My program howled.
Violation. Critical error. Damage to object.
The claw was not designed for this. It was designed to move. I squeezed harder. The shell was made of hard plasteel, but my claw was a hydraulic press. There was a quiet, painful sound of deformation. The shell buckled. Not much, but enough. The spider froze. I heard him slowly turn his head back to me. Motion 3. Green light. The calibrator was designed to detect microfractures, not changes in geometry. The machine saw no error. My program was in stupor. It didn't know what to do. It was perfect, but it had encountered the impossible. But I knew. I pushed the shell, not to the reject bin. I pushed it onto the packing line. Sabotage. Heresy. This was not just a violation. This was desecration. I had sent corruption to the war front. The spider made a sound. It wasn't a vox. It was a low, vibrating scrape. A sound of hatred. He raised his staff. I could see his shadow on the wall in front of me. The shadow of the staff rose above my head. I shut my eyes. Or rather, I deactivated my optics. I saw the color blue again. I'm flying, Callan. I was ready. A deafening explosion. The entire factory shuddered. It wasn't the blow from the staff. It was an explosion. To my left, where Gamma 78 stood, something had exploded. I switched on my optics. Gamma 78's line was destroyed. The conveyor was twisted. The station he was chained to was on fire. And Gamma 78 himself, he was not clean. He had torn himself free. I didn't know how it was possible. He had ripped himself from the cables, torn the anchor bolts from the floor. He stood in the middle of the fire, his claws clenched. He was not empty. He was mad. He turned his head, not at me, not at the spider, at Delta 12. And Delta 12, he was no longer afraid. He was working. He was methodically, one by one, taking shells from his line and throwing them onto the floor. Throw, ring, throw, ring. He wasn't sabotaging. He was rioting. The spider howled, a truly inhuman howl. He forgot about me.
My sabotage was nothing compared to this. Open rebellion. He lunged at Delta 12, swinging his staff. Gamma 78, the mad one, stepped into his path. It was chaos. The alarm sirens wailed for real. Violation. Uprising. Purge. I stood, chained to my station. The spider fought Gamma 78. Delta 12 continued his monotonous riot. And in that moment, Delta 12 looked at me. Through the fire, the sirens, and the din, his optic met mine. He stopped throwing shells. He raised his left claw, and slowly, deliberately, he pointed. Not at me, not at an exit. He pointed down, at the floor, next to my station. There was a hatch, a small square maintenance hatch I had seen thousands of times, but which had been no more to me than a part of the floor. Forbidden Zone, Protocol 000. The spider struck. Gamma 78 fell, sliced in half. The spider turned to Delta 12. Delta 12 did not look away from me. He stared at me as the spider advanced on him. Run. It wasn't a word. It was his gaze. The spider raised his staff over Delta 12. I looked down at my restraints, at the cables that chained me to the machine. My program screamed, "Stay, work, obey." I placed my claws on the emergency release junctions. I knew if I pulled, the feedback would shock me. I knew it might kill me, but I also knew the spider would kill me anyway. Delta 12 had given me a chance. Gamma 78, whoever he had been, had given me time. I remembered the blue dress. "I'm flying, Callan." The spider brought his staff down. I pulled. The world exploded in pain and electricity. I shouldn't have been able to feel it. Pain receptors offline. But this wasn't the pain of the flesh. It was a systemic shock. Millions of volts, meant to power the station, surged through my body as I tore the cables. My optics went dark. My audio sensors exploded with white noise. All systems, error, error, error. I was blind, deaf, and dead to the world, but I was free. The restraints, unpowered, hissed and sprang open. My dead, half-ton body crashed from the station to the floor. The impact was so hard, had I been human, it would have turned my bones to dust. But I was a machine. System, emergency reboot, power, 12%, internal batteries only. My optics flickered and engaged. My vision was clouded with static. The world was jittery. Red alert runes filled my entire field of vision.
The wail of the sirens was deafening. The factory was in chaos. 10 feet away, the spider, thrown back by my electrical discharge, was getting to his arachnid feet. His electro staff lay on the floor, hissing. It was damaged. Gamma 78, the hero I would never know, lay in the fire of his station, cut in half. Delta 12. I turned my head. He was on the floor, motionless. The spider's blow had landed. His chassis was breached. His optic, which had been looking at me until the last second, was dark. He hadn't just given me a chance. He had given his second mechanical life for it. Run. His final silent command burned in my brain. The spider raised his head. His optics, no longer just red, but a furious scarlet, focused on me. He saw me. Free, broken, heretic. He let out a scraping howl and lunged, not for his staff, but straight at me, his sharp as razor limbs extended. The hatch. Delta 12's command. I was on the floor. The hatch was 5 feet away. The spider was 10. I couldn't run. My legs were made to stand, but I could crawl. I dug my claws into the metal floor and dragged my body forward, a hideous scraping sound. I was clumsy, heavy, broken. And he was fast, the predator he was. He sprang. In that same instant, I rolled. He landed where I had been a split second before, his talons gouging the steel with a deafening shriek. I was at the hatch. Forbidden Zone, Protocol 000. There was no handle. It was sealed with maglocks. The spider was coiling for another leap. I had no time. I raised my right claw. I was not just a machine. I was a broken machine. I was rage. I struck. I put all my half-ton mass into that blow. All my hatred for this factory. All my memory of the color blue. The claw punched through the thick metal hatch as if it were paper. The spider froze. He hadn't expected this. He expected me to obey protocols. He didn't know my protocols were gone. I grabbed what was left of the hatch cover and tore it up. The metal howled under the strain, ripped from its hinges by my hydraulics. Below was darkness, impenetrable thick darkness, and a smell, not of oil and ozone, but of rot, stagnant water, ancientness. The spider leaped. I didn't bother to climb down. I just fell into the darkness. I didn't fall far. The impact on the concrete bottom was hard. My system screamed in pain again. I had landed in some kind of viscous, cold sludge. Above me, in the rectangle of light, the spider's silhouette appeared. He looked down at me. I was in a maintenance tunnel, in the guts of the Manufactorum. The spider did not hesitate. He folded his limbs and jumped in after me. I scrambled to my feet. My legs could barely hold me. It was dark. My optics desperately tried to amplify the light, but there was no light. I switched to night vision. The world became a ghostly green. I was in a tunnel, knee-deep in murky water. I ran, or rather, I waded as fast as I could. My heavy feet sent up fountains of filthy water. Each step was a dull, heavy impact that echoed down the tunnel. And behind me there was a light splash, and then the rapid, quiet tapping of his footfalls. He was here. He was lighter than me, faster. His spider legs allowed him to run along the walls, avoiding the water. I heard his tapping, sometimes to my left, sometimes to my right, sometimes directly overhead. There was no red line in my head, no map. For the first time in my new life, I didn't know where to go. I just ran from the sound at my back. The tunnel forked, left, right. Analysis, airflow stronger to the right. I turned right. The tapping behind me grew louder. He was closing the distance. I saw a light ahead. Not green, not red. A dim gray light. An exit. The tunnel ended in a grate. Thick, rusted bars, and beyond them, I couldn't believe it. Sky. It wasn't blue, it was brown, choked with venomous smog. But it was the sky. I threw myself at the grate. I grabbed the bars. Pull. The rusted metal wouldn't budge. The tapping of his steps stopped. I froze. He was here. I slowly turned around. 10 feet away, in the darkness of the tunnel, the spider stood. He was slowly unfurling his limbs. His scarlet optics burned like 2 coals. He was in no hurry. He had me. He raised an arm. His finger talons extended. He would walk over and tear out my power unit. I looked at the grate, at the brown sky. I looked at the spider. He was the system. He was order. He was my past. The sky was the unknown. I slammed my fist against the grate. Once, twice. The bars bent but held.
The spider began to walk toward me, savoring the moment. I looked down. Below the grate I was pressed against, there was another tunnel, a spillway, a wide pipe from which a torrent of something was roaring. Black, oily slurry rushing into the darkness at incredible speed. Analysis. High corrosive fluid. Survival probability 14%. The spider was 5 feet away. He raised his arm to strike. I looked at him, at the grate, at the torrent below. 14%. It wasn't 0. In my brain, for the last time, that file flashed. Blue. "I'm flying, Callan!" The spider lunged at me. I didn't bother with the grate. I struck the concrete under it. The floor exploded into rubble. I didn't wait. I just stepped into the void. I fell into the torrent. It was like falling into liquid ice that was also on fire. The fluid was freezing and caustic. It began to eat at my chassis immediately. System, critical damage. Hull, breached. The current seized me and dragged me into the darkness. I could see the spider's silhouette in the hole above me, shrinking. He was watching me. He had won. He had forced me to destroy myself. But he was wrong. I was no longer just metal. I was an idea. The torrent slammed me against the walls. My optics began to fade. Power, 2%. 1%. Everything went dark. In nice initializes. A sharp impact. I had been spat out of the pipe, skidding several meters across. Ash. I lay there. Silence. There was no noise from the factory, no tapping of his footfalls. Only the wind, a quiet, weeping wail. I opened my optics. Above me was the sky, brown, filthy, poisoned. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Systems, critical failure, cooling, offline, hydraulics, damaged, power, emergency reserve. I was broken. I was dying. I lay on an endless field of grey ash. Behind me, like a mountain range from a nightmare, the black silhouette of the Manufactorum loomed. I was outside. I didn't know what this world was. I didn't know what I would do. But I was free. I clenched my claw. It barely obeyed. I scooped up a handful of cold, dead ash. There was no more error in my memory. The blue file was in its place. It was no longer a virus. It had become my operating system. I was Gamma 77. I was Callan. I was something new. I was